Hello, everyone, and welcome to Online UWC Week 3. This week we're talking about sustainable agriculture, and today we have with us Nadine Souto. Nadine first became interested in sustainable development when she was studying at UWC Mahindra College. Then she actually studied sociology with a focus on sustainable development when she was at university, and she participated in multiple projects related to this field, including waste management, energy efficiency, clean water advocacy, and food security. And then in 2012, she co-founded a sustainability website called Comunumo, and she became involved with the Venezuelan UWC National Committee, where she now serves as executive director. So Nadine, would you like to tell us more about what you would talk about today?
Sure. Well, first I want to mention that I'm really happy to be back at UWC Online. Last fall, I participated in the session of this sustainability course, and I'm excited to be back. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about what are generally seen as some of the main problems in the food system, the way food is produced and distributed, especially in the developing world, in the developed world, though some of this also applies to developing countries. And I'm also going to be talking about some initiatives that have sprung up to sort of deal with these problems. And I'm going to introduce the concept of food security, which is sort of one framework for building a more just and sustainable food system. And I'm going to draw from sociology. I'm going to use some key concepts that I think can provide a framework that is helpful not only to talk and think about food, but also about sustainability issues in general. So the first concept that I want to introduce is the tension between individual agency and social structure. Okay, so to what extent are individuals capable of determining their own life paths and have an impact on their surroundings, considering that there are some very powerful pressures, economic, cultural, political, that are constantly acting upon us, sometimes in ways that we aren't even aware of. Okay, so obviously it's not a black and white issue. There are clearly, some choices that we can make, and we're not completely sort of dependent on these structures, but it's something to think about. The better that we understand these structures and are able to critically examine them, the more we're going to be able to have an impact on issues like food and anything else related to sustainability and other social causes. Okay, so I want to start with a cartoon that I chose that I think is helpful to look at food in this way. So maybe we can share the screen.
Yep. Let me present. I'm gonna go on mute while I'm presenting. So if I ever have to change, I'll unmute.
Okay. Okay, so as you can see, we have here a situation in a community of dinosaurs. I'm going to give you a second to read the text. And what's going on here is a certain resistance on the part of the meat-eating dinosaurs against the vegetarian dinosaur. Okay, in a way, this is human nature, or in this case, I guess dinosaur nature, to reject that which is different. Maybe the dinosaurs feel like the vegetarian dinosaur is passing judgment on their lifestyle choices. But there's also something else going on here that is relevant to what we'll be talking about, and is that the dinosaur that chose to give up meat is actually challenging important power structures that support meat consumption. Okay, these are cultural, economic, and social. So what we see as an individual change is actually connected with some very important systemic structures. Okay, and if we go on to the next slide, we see here sort of these choices that we're often confronted with regard to sustainability in the area of food. We're told to eat organic as opposed to conventional produce, and we're told to ride our bikes as opposed to driving. But these are pitted to us as individual lifestyle choices, especially with regard to consumption. when actually many of these choices are influenced by structures that are beyond our control and that make it difficult to implement these structures. So I'm going to argue that in the area of food and other sustainability issues, it's important to actually work in communities, with governments, with organizations, to challenge and change these larger structures which are conditioning these individual choices, as opposed to just trying to create awareness and change the choices themselves. Yeah, so if we go on to the next slide, we can begin to talk about some of the problems with industrial agriculture, which is the main source of food, especially in developed countries like the United States. And here we have one of the structures, or one of the main practices that belong to industrial agriculture, and that is monoculture. This refers to cultivating a single crop over a vast expanse of land, okay? Very large-scale operations. So this requires intensive resource use, not only water for irrigation purposes, but also fossil fuels for all the heavy machinery, as well as pesticides and herbicides, which are strictly required when you're growing crops in this manner. There's also significant environmental damage, so for example, very high greenhouse gas emissions, groundwater pollution as a result of chemical use, and pest resistance that can develop among these crops because of the abuse of chemicals. There are also important health impacts to humans as a result of consuming food grown in this way. There's a second practice associated with industrial agriculture, which is meat production in what are known as confined animal feeding operations. So these are also very large-scale farms where animals are kept, bred, and slaughtered. And this also requires high volumes of resources, water and fossil fuels as well, but also important chemical inputs. For example, antibiotics to keep the animals relatively healthy and alive, considering that they're in such cramped and unsanitary conditions, and also hormones, because the idea is to get these animals to grow as fast as possible to be able to get them out of the way, so to speak, and into the supermarket shelves. There are also considerable animal welfare concerns involved here, because these animals are living in confined spaces. They're being fed high-calorie, grain-based diets, which are not the best suited to their organisms. And there are also, of course, inhumane slaughtering practices that we've all heard of. And finally, the health issues that are associated with consuming meat that is grown in these conditions. Okay, so what are the benefits of industrial agriculture as we know it that relies on both of these practices? You have very high yields, right? And you're able, and this is suitable for, we are told, for feeding large populations at a lower cost. However, when we look a little bit at what the current state of food consumption is in the world, we see that headlines such as these are headlines from the year 2014. We see that the obesity epidemic, that's actually a concept that has risen now as a result of obesity rates rising significantly in places like Mexico, even Africa, which is a place that we would normally associate with starving children. Well, it just turns out that this is actually the newest epidemic that is afflicting Africa. At the same time, we see that there's still a significant problem of chronic undernourishment and malnourishment. And if we look at the last line on the slide, it says, not getting enough calories is the only way to starve. So what does this mean? We can have a lot of food available, but not necessarily is this food the best for our health. If we go to the next slide, we're going to see another issue that is currently present in our food system, and that is the very high, alarmingly high rate of food waste across the world, especially though in developed countries. We see that in North America and Oceania, up to 1,500 calories are being wasted per person. This is almost enough to feed an entire whole new person. The recommended calorie intake is 2,000. So we see that something is amiss, right? We're generating all this food in these conditions that are not ideal. We're not being fed well, and we're wasting a lot of it. So it seems like we need a new paradigm. And the concept that I want to put forth that is being used a lot these days is the concept of food security. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to see a definition, formal definition of food security, and that is physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. Okay, so here we have health concerns coming into play. We have obviously the issue of access and also culture, because we're talking about food preferences. What do people want to eat, and what is good for them to eat? Perhaps one aspect that is missing from this definition, and that many organizations and people working on these issues might add, is the issue of environmental. Making sure that not only is food good for people, it's also being produced and distributed in conditions that are not detrimental to the environment. So I want to talk to you about an experience that I had in a community that I was a part of, and that was associated with the concept of food security. And this was in the New York town of Poughkeepsie. This is a city of about 30,000 people. And here we conducted something that was called the Poughkeepsie Food Survey as part of the Poughkeepsie Plenty Project. And the idea of the survey was to find out to what extent people in Poughkeepsie were food secure or food insecure. So to what extent were they actually able to access food that was healthy for them, okay? And it turned out that 26% of households in Poughkeepsie did not have access. And the main issues were affordability on the one hand, so people weren't actually able to pay for the food that was best for them, but also physical access. So you would find that, for example, the best places to buy vegetables was not actually in the city, but in the suburbs. So people that were living in the inner city had to take a bus that could be quite costly to the suburb. Also, the bus schedules weren't very convenient. And once there, they had to, shop at these sometimes expensive chain supermarkets. And even if they did that, it turned out that when they got back on the bus, there was a ridiculous rule that limited the amount of grocery bags that you could bring onto the bus up to 3. So people had to make many shopping trips, and this made it really inconvenient to be able to be able to access healthy food. So as a result of this survey, the Poughkeepsie Plenty group conducted a series of community forums to understand the experiences of people and a series of initiatives to improve access and education surrounding these issues. So there were farmers markets installed, also mobile farmers markets, so that people didn't have to come to the market, but the market in a way came to them. There was also a food equality newspaper brought out to raise awareness about these issues, and a policy working group. So essentially you had civil society coming together with the government and the private sector to build a sturdier food system for the Poughkeepsie community, and this is something that is actually ongoing. Okay, so this is one example of not only looking at people's individual lifestyle choices with regard to food, but also in what ways can we change the structures that might have an impact on these choices. Okay, so I want you to see the difference there, which I think is key. There's another example that we could look at when thinking about initiatives regarding different approaches to food. You've probably heard of Meatless Monday, and the idea here is that you would one day a week not consume meat, and this day is Monday. And this is something that has actually been pretty widespread. They've even had some celebrities come on board. But if you look at this, it's actually about consumption choice, and it's about raising awareness among individuals and communities to change their lifestyle choices. But to what extent are they actually changing the structures behind that? That would be perhaps the question or the critique, or maybe we should do a little bit more research to find out to what extent this is actually happening with this model of changing food systems. And then, something that is pretty widespread, it's not a brand, so to speak, but something that has taken root in a lot of communities, especially across the U.S., it's community gardens, So in the next slide, we're going to see a couple images of community gardens where people come together to grow their own food in spaces close to their communities. This could even be in the city itself. So if you look at the image on the bottom right, this looks like a rooftop of some sort in a city. And the issue, the idea here is not only to improve access by bringing it closer to people, but also about engaging and educating people and building a community around food production, creating public space. These are small-scale operations, so it's not just about the consumption, but it's also about the production of that and what sort of social transformations can we bring about. So we see here that there are several different approaches that we can take. And just to give you some final thoughts, I think that, one thing that might be a little bit across the board true for a lot of people that work in food issues. There are so many other initiatives that I could talk about, and I think that as part of the email that you were sent, there were several other links shown that are good examples of this. One of the main causes of our current sort of food crisis, so to speak, has to do with our disconnect from food. So people often don't know where it comes from, who it's made of, in what conditions. So a lot of these initiatives are about cultivating that closer relationship between people and what they're putting in their mouth. So, yeah, that's my contribution for today.
Great, thank you so much. I have lots of difficult questions for you.
Oh, dear.
Yes, because you spoke quite unfavorably about industrial farming and its terrible consequences on the environment, and also some ethical concerns in general about the conditions in which they leave the animals, and then finally the outcome, which basically is malnutrition for the people who use produce consumed in this way. So I guess one of the biggest successes of industrial farming has been that there is enough food theoretically to provide to everyone. And would it be possible to provide food for all of globe's population using non-industrial farming methods? Is it something that's a utopia, or is it actually technologically possible?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the main sort of counter arguments to the whole, vision of small scale versus large scale. I think that this is something that I frankly can't answer myself. It's a debate that is ongoing. But for example, in Michael Pollan's TED Talk, he speaks of ways of maximizing production beyond what has been traditionally expected through more traditional means. So I think that is the question of getting our human innovation juices flowing and creating these spaces, because I think that this comes back also to the issue of disconnect from food. I think that to the extent that we are able to create these multiple small-scale operations, not only is this going to potentially provide spaces for more ethical and environmentally responsible production, but it's also going to bring us in touch. So you have sort of that double benefit behind it. Yeah, I think that this is definitely a debate that is ongoing, and something that maybe it's not a black or white issue. Maybe you don't have to go all the way with industrial, but you don't also have to go Amish or anything. So I think that maybe the middle ground is the way to go, and it's something that I think a lot of initiatives are working towards finding a common ground, perhaps.
I think I'm actually quite optimistic. I think we just haven't really thought about it. Like, no one really thinks about this. I remember when we first started the course, and I first read about permaculture. I didn't even know that this was possible. And I think that just knowing how new ideas circulate in tech, um, they circulate very quickly, but I'm not sure that good ideas circulate as quickly in agriculture, specifically if main players have an interest to keep things the way they are because they are winning in this market.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, but I do have a very strong belief in human ingenuity to solve issues. Then I
Definitely,
had
definitely.
another question.
Just
Um,
quickly about
mhm,
it's also about paradigms. I think that the green revolution sort of installed a very dominant paradigm about the most intelligent way to grow food, and that really uh, obviously there were good things to that, but it also did a lot of damage in terms of sort of displacing other good paradigms concerning food production, and now it's sort of the way of the challenge is to sort of bring those back and to accommodate them to modern times and to modern needs. I think that that's part of the work that is being done currently that is very, with permaculture and other approaches, that is very valuable.
mhm. Then I have another question because actually this is a question that has to do with malnutrition and obesity. Because while I understand that a lot of these issues have to do with maybe lack of knowledge, lack of education, or as you have wonderfully explained, lack of access to healthy foods, I also sometimes think that a lot of it has to do with choice. So people love carbs. Carbs make us feel good in the short term. Um, you eat a pizza, it gives you an energy high, and you just want to continue eating. You have McDonald's. It's extremely satisfying to bite into a burger, and it makes you feel great. Salt, butter, and carbs are generally well known to be quite satisfying, but also quite addictive. So how do you face the issue of personal choice that actually drives people to make these unhealthy choices? Um, and how do you fight with it? Like, what's the most effective way from a sociology, psychology, neuroscience perspective of really dealing with this issue?
Well, I think a lot of it is about making the healthy choice cool. If you think about how choices, food choices in the U.S. play out currently, you see that a lot of people who are going organic, farmers market, produce kind of food aisle, um, are actually pretty well off people, and they're doing so not only because they have the means, and these products tend to be more expensive because they're more exclusive, less available on the market, but also because it gives them a certain sort of cachet, a certain prestige, and I think that this is something very powerful because, these people are just as human as everyone else. They also have sort of this natural evolutionary sort of drive to prefer high calorie foods, but something in their, you know, their social being chooses these healthier options because not only are they available and affordable to them, but they're also more gives them more prestige. So I think that this is something that we could, obviously this creates problems because it's still, there's still a situation of inequality, the way it currently works, and this is a lot of the controversy surrounding the whole organic movement, and to what extent is this actually a possibility for everybody, or is it necessarily only for an elite? But I think that it can tell us something about how we can work toward making this desirable for people when we're talking about choice.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Um, Great, thank you. I think that those were the two best questions that I had. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us today. In case students have any questions about your lecture, I will email you, and hopefully you will be able to find the time to respond to them. And yeah, it looks like the internet connection has worked this time around. So so yeah, no, hopefully we'll speak to each other soon with the next edition of the online UWC course. Thanks so much, Nadine. Bye bye.
Thank you, Hannah. Bye. Best of luck.